Ireland is famous for three things: Guinness, having the crack, and the river dance. But we don't care about that shit. We're here to talk about birds. I'm John Cusack.
I'm Peter Phillips.
And I'm Brian McCluskey.
Welcome to Two in the Hand. Okay, folks, as I said in our incredibly corny introduction, we are Two in the Hand, and you're very, very much welcome here. You could call us Twitchers. I know that's a much maligned word. It's a word that's met with a little bit of apprehension in certain circles, and arguably justifiably so. But what we hope to do over the coming episodes is change your perception of that particular term, because we think we're nice people, even if the rest of the world doesn't. And hopefully we'll show that and illustrate that. The purpose of this podcast or this video vlog format type show is to highlight birding or bird watching in Ireland, and that's what we intend to bring to you on a semi-regular basis. We haven't just defined whether it'll be a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly show yet, but that's in the works. As I say, we hope to talk to you all about birds and Ireland's wildlife in general. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of the show, I'd like to just take this time to, I suppose, tip my cap to some of our contemporary bird watchers in Ireland. The lads are from Cork. They run a show called The Fillmore Corner, and they're highly, highly entertaining. And I have to say that they were very much the inspiration for us, to take the leap and film our own show. This is something that Brian, Peter, and I have been talking about for, it seems like years now, certainly at least 1 year, and we've never really had, I suppose, the gumption to go out and put something down on paper. But seeing the lads take the leap and being brave certainly inspired us to do so. So well done. And any of our followers or potential followers who haven't heard of the Fillmore Corner, please feel free to head over and check them out. A very worthwhile podcast. That being said, I reckon it's about time that we introduce ourselves a little bit. I've been talking for long enough at that point, so I'm going to hand you over to one of my co-hosts who is going to tell you a little bit about themselves. So who wants to go first, guys?
I'll go first. My name's Peter Phillips, and I've been birding for 40 years. When I was younger, I suppose how I really got into it to start was when I think I was 11 years old, and I got a pair of binoculars for my birthday. And we drove in, we lived in Dublin, and we drove into Cleary's department store at the time. And we bought the pair of binoculars, and on the way home, I begged and pleaded my parents to stop at a place called Bull Island, which is a famous nature reserve on the outskirts of Dublin. And it's really good for birds. So we drove a high-ace van, so you can imagine all the family was crammed into the back of the van. So we stopped at St. Anne's Park, just opposite Bull Island. And I got out and across the road, and I scanned my first view of, if you like, sort of birds that weren't in the garden. And I couldn't get over the amount of birds. It was full of ducks and geese, seagulls, wading birds. It really blew my mind. It just opened my eyes to the array of bird life that you can find even in a city like Dublin. And I never looked back from there. I spent my youth in fields close to my house looking for birds. Any sort of birds initially, but as I got a little bit older, I got a bit interested in rare birds, so I'd always be on the lookout for something rare or unusual. And then as you get older again, when you turn into your teenage years, your thoughts start to turn to other kinds of birds, not the feathered kinds. And so I drifted out of the birding scene. And in recent years now, I'm married now with kids, I've had the opportunity to kind of get out birding more often. I like particularly going looking for rare birds. In Ireland, we live in one of the best locations in the Western Palearctic for finding rare birds. Now, we live on the east coast of Ireland, but a lot of these great sites like Cape Clear, the Bridges of Ross, Tecumseh, they're only 3 or 4 hours from our house, so we can drive there and do some amazing birding all in a day. So and in the last year or two, I've kind of teamed up with these lads and we've been on some epic twitches, and I'm just having a great time.
Yeah, so I'm Brian McCluskey. I'm 21 and I'm from Carrickmacross in County Monaghan. So Carrickmacross is about 25 minutes from John and about 15 minutes from Peter. I was introduced to birding probably when I was about 6 or 7. My father introduced me to kind of local, like common kind of species. So he showed me the differences between moorhens and coots, and then the songs of willow warbler and chiffchaffs. And from then it kind of just the growth of my interest just was rapid. I remember in 2010 I was brought to Annagassan, which is a beach near Dundalk, which is in County Louth, and I had the loan of a scope. So I remember seeing Dunlin and the Godwits and things like that for the first time, and from then it really just I started to get a massive interest then in species that I had never seen before. So my first twitch was in 2011 when I was about 12 or so, and that was to see a great grey shrike, which was in Slieve na Cloy Nature Reserve in County Antrim. And great grey shrike it's quite a regular and common, I suppose, species across Europe, but in Ireland it's a once in a generation, nearly once in a lifetime kind of species. So from then it kind of, the twitching, I suppose, from then on it was still a bit slow. I only got on maybe 2 or 3 twitches a year, so I managed to get things like elegant tern and ivory gull while I was still at school and things like that. But in the last couple of years, when I met John, Peter, and then another birder, Jared Murray, we've kind of went for pretty much every kind of rarity that has turned up in the country, and I spend ridiculous amount of hours every year birding and twitching. My favourite places would probably be the Bridges of Ross, Tecumseh, and Mizenhead, purely for birding. My local patch would consist of lakes and also Dundalk, which is coastline. I love trying to find rare birds, but living in Monaghan, it's not the easiest thing to do, digging out rarities. So that's why I try to get down to West Cork in October to try to give myself a better chance at finding rarities. So
Brian, you're fairly young and you've only been twitching for a few years. How many species have you seen in Ireland?
It's 331 at the moment. So.
Wow, that's fairly impressive because I think I'm on 322. I'm
Peter, you have a bit to go.
You can teach me a thing or two, but I haven't given up hope of catching you.
That's one thing about twitching. Even though we're very close, the three of us, it's very competitive between us as well. Like, especially if one of us misses a bird or one of us gains a bird on someone else, it kind of boosts the interest, I suppose, amongst us. So
we're incredibly bitter people. That was a nice way to say it, Brian, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
We begrudge our best mate's success. That's essentially what you're saying there. No, but you're correct. You're correct indeed.
Because according to John Cusack, the best bird in Ireland is tawny pipit and golden oriole, which are the 2 that I missed.
Yeah, they're the only 2 birds that I have over, Brian, and I have to wholeheartedly say they are the best birds that you can see. So that's true too. You will get sense. Yeah,
John, how many species have you seen, John? Because you're new on the scene.
Yeah, I am actually. I am quite new on the scene in terms of the twitching side of things. And actually in birding experience in general, I'd be very much the low man on the totem pole here when compared to you two guys, and in terms of experience. So I've been birding for, I suppose you could say, 5 years, but I've only been doing it in a serious fashion for about 3.5. And in those 3.5 years, I've rocked up 300 species, which is, from what I'm told, is pretty much the quickest that anyone's ever got to 300 in an Irish context. So I'm
That's fairly impressive, John. Well done.
Thanks. Involved a lot of driving, I will say that, and that'll become clear as we go through. But yeah,
but you're still 21 behind me.
I am indeed, Peter.
And 30 behind me.
Yes, very, very true. But I hope to claw them back a little bit, Brian. You're going to grow up eventually.
That's true.
Right?
Not
You're going to
for a
grow
while,
up. You're going to grow up. And Peter, I'm just going to stop telling you when birds show up. So that's how I'm going to catch you. But yeah, so by way of an introduction, I'm John Cusack. I live about 20 minutes from Brian. I live in North Monaghan. And I got into birding through photography, and it kind of changed a little bit to say, but through hunting as well. But without those things, I really wouldn't have developed the passion that I have for birds. So I have to be thankful for them, for instilling that in me. So that's us, folks. As Peter has said, we're from, I suppose, the northeast of Ireland. All of us, we live relatively close together. We would argue that that positions us quite well in terms of twitching throughout the country of Ireland. And also, we would suggest that Ireland itself, from a Western Palearctic standpoint, is quite quite unique in some of the birds that can show up here as well. It is a special place, and we're quite happy to be twitching and spending our time birding there. So that's a little bit about us, folks. That's who we are, where we come from, and some of, I suppose, our birding stats. We've all we've told you our list number, and any twitcher or any serious birder will tell you that's a very, very personal thing. It's like asking a woman her age. You don't ask anybody what the list is in a birding context. But we've done that. We've gone out on a limb and done that for you in week 1 as well. You don't know how lucky you are, but anyway. So that said, the introductions for us individually have been complete. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on, and we're going to introduce ourselves as a collective. And what I mean by that is we're going to discuss a little bit about how we got our name, how Two in a Hand came about, be that in the sense of the title of the show, but also as a group of, I suppose, twitching pals. So who wants to tell that story? Who wants to start?
Well, it was last October, and we were going birding. Now, sometimes we go twitching together, but I think our preference is to go and actually try and find a rare bird. And if you're trying to find rare birds, the kind of creme de la creme of rare bird finding in Ireland in particular, and probably in Europe, is an American land bird. They're so rare. They're like rare as hen's teeth. And as John was saying earlier, we live in an amazing location for finding rare birds. We live just close enough to North America that in the right weather conditions, the odd American land bird makes landfall. But it's really only during exceptional weather conditions and in particular times of the year. And October is probably the best time of year for finding an American warbler or a sparrow. So last October, with that in mind, a group of 5 of us, the 3 lads here, and Tom and Jared Murray, who you'll be hearing about later, we headed off to the old head of Kinsale, which is a headland in the southwest corner of Ireland in Cork. Now, to get there, if you're going to do a day's birding from where we live, you have to leave very early in the morning. So I think we left about 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I think that we left our house at 3, but I think John might have left about 2 o'clock. And we headed off down the road. And when we got to Cork, it was still dark. And we just got to the outskirts of Cork. So we were kind of filled with anticipation about the day to come. The weather had been really good. And we were hopeful of finding a rare bird. So we arrived at a service station, so just on the outskirts of Cork. We stopped, have a rest, have something to eat, something to drink, refuel the car. And then the day took a bit of a surreal twist. Brian's phone started to ring.
So, well, I got a notification on my phone. It was from Victor Cashera, who's one of the highest listed twitchers in Ireland. So it was to say that another birder called Anthony McGeehan, who birds Inishboffin Island off County Galway, very regularly, especially in autumn. And he had just found a black and white warbler. Well, he had actually found it the previous evening. So black and white warbler is an extremely rare black and white warbler, passerine from North America. So this was only the third record ever in Ireland, and the previous record was 1984, so which was well before I was born. So it's a very wanted kind of species for a lot of birders.
I suppose you could describe it, Ryan, as a once in a generation bird. You might only get one
for sure
in your birding life to see one in Ireland.
Yeah, well, certainly in Ireland, there seem to records, I suppose, in terms of Western Pal. I think there's a few records. Most of the records come from the Azores and Britain, and then I think the French have a couple of records too. So in terms of like Western Pal, like it's a mega rare bird. So
to let people know, Western Pal is the Western Palearctic. So that kind of includes Europe, Russia, Iceland. I think even parts of North Africa. So it's it's a huge area.
Yeah. So when we heard this news, I think we were kind of we were just kind of getting refreshments, I suppose, in the filling station, and I think I just ran over to the lads and told them the news, and within minutes we were on the road heading for Galway. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we certainly were. Well, we didn't head for Galway straight away because we pulled out of the service station and everybody screamed, go, go, go. And being the driver, I had to ask, go where? What direction, lads? Left or right? Just give me a direction and I'll go. We actually had quite a bit of trouble kind of finding the location on our sat nav, but eventually we did, and we made our way up the road as quickly as we could without breaking any traffic laws. There was a little added bit of pressure in that we didn't know if or when the ferry to Inishbofin was actually running. We found two conflicting ferry timetables online, so we really didn't know what time we had to be there. We just chose the earliest one and pushed as hard as we could to try and get there on time. So, you know, that should maybe give you a little insight into the typical atmosphere of a twitch. It's high pressure. There's lots of phone calls while you're traveling around to try and find out who's going for this bird, or try and get as accurate and up-to-date information as possible. And the truth of it is, oftentimes you're groping in the dark because you don't have definite answers. News broke of this bird at midnight. Apparently, and we heard it at like 3 a.m. So you can't exactly just ring everybody and wake them up out of bed and ask where this is. You have to be a little bit cautious and tactful, and that resulted in us not knowing for sure where we were going and stuff like that. So it was quite stressful. I think the lads would agree with me there. But we arrived into Clifton anyway, and we arrived in. I believe I pretty much abandoned the car in the near semblance of a car park, and we rushed to the ticket office, which was bloody closed. So at this point, we had two different times for the ferries, and we had nowhere to buy a ticket. So we were panicking. We were really, really panicking. But luckily, in true Irish fashion, the pub was open at about 8:30 in the morning. So we'll not discuss what that says about our culture. But the pub was open, and we went in there and we asked what the story was. And we found out, luckily, actually the ferry was going, and it transpired that we were a little bit early. We were an hour early actually, and Ger had time to relax and get a try. And for those of you who don't know, Ger loves his pumpkins. So he was well fed and ready to go, which is the most important thing on any twitch. So do any of you want to kind of discuss what happened from there, lads?
Yeah, we were kind of standing around talking, and it was tantalizing because from the ferry you can see the island. Like the island is only like a couple of miles off the coast. You can see the island. You can actually see the area where the bird was. We were kind of so near and yet so far. You know, you nearly want to feel like jumping off the pier and swimming over because you're so close. But that being said, we weren't 100% sure that the bird was there that morning because it had been found the night before. And we were kind of, a few of the boarders had arrived, and we were kind of discussing what was going to happen. I think another phone went off. Did it, Brian?
It did, yes. So I was standing beside Connor Foley, who's again another high listen twitcher in Ireland, and he saw a WhatsApp message, and it basically, my heart just sunk when he told me what it said. It was Baltimore Oriole had just been found on Achill Island, which is in County Mayo, and Josh Jones and Michael O'Brien had found that. So Baltimore Oriole is again another passerine from North America. So it's two like once in a generation species kind of turning up. I suppose the only thing with Baltimore Oriole was that that was the fourth Irish record. So, but all records have been since 2000. So, and also there's kind of a northerly bias to all the Western Palearctic records, with kind of Iceland, Norway getting a record, the Netherlands and Britain, and then a couple from the Azores. But in terms of Irish rarity, it was very similar to black and white warbler. So it really kind of, we had a dilemma really of what to do. So
yeah, I think just to put into context there, the Baltimore Oriole is about the size of a common starling, which is a bird people often get in their garden. So a similar size, but it's got this nice orange coloration and the white stripes on the wing. I mean, people might be wondering, wow, how come two rare American land birds turned up, almost simultaneously on the west coast of Ireland? So the reason for that is the weather conditions that bring these birds. What happens is in North America, when the birds are flying south on their migration, many of them move over the sea across the Caribbean into where they winter in South America. And when you get certain weather conditions, storms, it blows these birds out to sea, and probably tens of thousands of birds get caught up in these systems. Most of them get lost, but occasionally a few of the stronger ones actually survive and make landfall in Europe. So it's not unusual for a rare bird to turn up and another rare bird to turn up a few days later, quite close by.
And it's funny because I always remember the way Peter put it. It was like as if you lost the winning lottery ticket on the West Coast and you have to go and find it. That's the kind of level of rarity that you're dealing with when it comes to finding these species in Ireland. So what happened was we were booked onto the boat. Everybody was gathered around the pier, and I think John was I think I was the only one that didn't want to go. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true, Brian. So if I remember correctly, you were saying that the black and white warbler hadn't been seen that morning, and the Baltimore Oriole we knew was there. It was in. It was on show at certain points. It wasn't particularly showy, but it was being seen by birders. So you were suggesting that, look, if we head off for the bird now, we connect with it, and if we hear positive news of the black and white warbler, we can come back and get the later ferry out and possibly clinch the two birds. So it really is kind of a nightmare situation for birders, folks, because as the lads have stressed, the rarity of these birds is huge, and as well as that, the chances of connecting with another one within your lifetime are quite small. So I found myself kind of torn between friends, essentially. So I had McCluskey on one side, the little devil on my shoulder saying, "John, let's go, let's go, let's go." And then I had the two angels, the voices of experience, Peter and Jay, are saying, "Look, we've got a bird here that we've paid our tickets. We can pretty much see it. We've a bird in the hand here. Come on, let's go for it." And there was, let's just say, there was significant debate about what we should do. The lad shouting, "We have a bird in the hand here. Let's go." And McCluskey looked up with those big doe eyes of his, and he said, "But John, I want two in the hand." And that's how our name came around, folks. We've mercilessly slagged him about saying such a cheesy line ever since. And that's, as I say, how the name came around. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's get back to the twitch. Where we left off, we have neither bird at this point. We're standing on a pier not knowing what to do. And to be fair, we're having a right old natter at each other. There's a little bit of backbiting going on. And as invariably happens, there's some false information filtering through about, oh, the finder had it again, or this and that. Stuff that can't be verified, adding to the confusion, but adding little in terms of value. So I think after I suppose you could say a bit of a sulk, Brian. You gave in,
A bit.
yeah, to be fair. And we decided we'd go over and see the black and white warbler. As it
transpired, we didn't see the black and white warbler. That's the kind of risk you take with twitching. A lot of the time you turn up to the site the next morning and the bird has departed overnight. I suppose myself and John, got some sort of tiny little bit of consolation with a barred warbler, which is it's a European migrant, and that was an Irish tick for the two of us. But in terms of rarity, it's nowhere near the same level as black and white warbler.
Yeah, it was nice to see the bird. Don't get me wrong, and we got great views. But we were quite upset because by the time we had gone onto the island and got the return ferry, winter days essentially, they're short, and it ruled out any possibility of us actually getting to see the Baltimore Oriole. So that day we dipped 2 birds, folks. We missed out on 2 birds essentially, and it made the kind of feeling all the worse.
So you may even say, like, you could be in worse situations, like having 2 American land birds either side of you. But we went away, haven't seen none,
Yeah, exactly. It was bad. And I'll say that was as long a drive back to Monaghan as I've ever been on, folks.
Yeah.
It was quiet for once. It was quiet for once.
It's probably because we're all asleep, John.
Yeah, well, apart from, thankfully I was awake for most of it. But we had left Monaghan, we went to Cork, we drove from Cork to the outer Galway, and then back to Monaghan. There was a lot of driving at that point. We were very
John.
Yeah.
John, that's probably my entire carbon budget for about 6 months, that amount of driving.
I'd say so, Peter, yeah. But to be fair, we're going to plant a few trees. Don't worry too much about it.
We're still in the process of that.
Still in the process of planting those trees.
Well, in fairness, we have them planted up on Tory.
Yeah, we did plant a few trees. You really probably should have told the residents you were planting trees in their garden, Peter. But so we creeped into Monaghan, dejected, battered and broken, you could say, and we got a little bit of sleep that night, but
not much.
No, we resolved to try our best to be on Achill Island next morning for first light.
I actually think we got home at about, it was just after midnight, I think we got home.
Yeah, it was late,
and
very late.
I remember setting my alarm for 2:30, so very little sleep.
Really, probably wasn't worth our while going home.
No, it probably made us more tired,
we set off anyway. We went to Achill Island, and if you can imagine, the pressure was very, very much on this bird, because although there was only 2 birds there was a possibility that we were going to dip 3, because Baltimore Orioles are notoriously kind of difficult to connect with. They're skulky birds when they're over here, and as well as that, they don't stay too long.
Which is unusual, because you'd think for such a bright bird that it would be easy to see, but that's when a bird like a Baltimore Oriole is buried in a fuchsia bank, it's very impossible to pick out.
Very hard to see, but we went anyway. We went and we tried our best, and we arrived, and well, I saw the bird. I got a great view of the bird. For me, the bird popped up on top of the tree. It sat there for about a second and a half. I roared for the lads, and I probably shouldn't have shouted so loudly, because I reckon that caused the bird to go back.
He flushed it.
Well, here, easy there. Let's not wild accusations around. But I saw the bird quite well, and that was relatively early in the day. We gave it another 4 or 5 hours, and the lads had seen the bird, but really, really poor.
Terrible, yeah. It was really poor. Naked eye views. I never actually got the binoculars on the bird. Terrible. It was obvious that it was the bird based on size, but it was really poor. And just I'm not sure if it was mentioned on the way over. News of the nightjar up in Northern Ireland had been
NIGHTHAWK.
No, but it had gone out as a nightjar.
Oh, had it?
So it was then re-identified as a nighthawk, a common nighthawk from North America that morning. Mm-hmm. So that was so we could really only give it till 1 o'clock on Achill Island. Yeah.
And you didn't get any good views that day, Brian? No,
it was chronic. It was really bad. Yeah. I think another bird of Seamus Feeney, he did really well. He managed to get us about a half an hour before we arrived, it sat out for about 10 seconds for him. And then I think we had all left, and I think another few twitchers arrived, and I think Seamus went to the back of the garden and out popped the Baltimore Oriole again, and he managed super shots of it. So he was very lucky that day. But we went away having seen the bird, but kind of feeling like we dipped. Well, I did anyway. But,
You felt cheated, Brian.
I felt cheated, surely. Yeah. Because especially the fact that the bird had stayed the night and didn't, that's what you're kind of hoping for, and then it doesn't play ball.
And Brian, you mentioned the Nighthawk. The news of the Nighthawk broke then.
Yeah, so news had broke that morning that I think a couple of lads, Cathal Falk and James O'Neill, Josh Jones, they were kind of the first people to cop that the video that had been put up on Northern Ireland Birds had been it was showing more characteristics of common nighthawk than a nightjar. So
yeah, I think just to kind of put it in perspective, nightjar is like a bird that occurs in Europe. It'd be quite rare in Ireland, but there's a North American equivalent, looks very similar, and it's called a nighthawk, a common nighthawk. Now, there's a few kind of minor differences. One is that the nighthawk has a forked tail, and the white is a little bit different on the wing, but they're very similar. So they're easily confused. But the nighthawk is a really rare bird in Ireland. How many records are there, Brian?
That was only the third, and it was exactly every 10 years. So 1999, 2009, and then 2019. So
similar to the black and white.
And the Baltimore.
It's almost a once in a generation bird.
Yeah, it was just those couple of days were just exceptional in terms of American vagrants,
So you had three birds, and there were nearly all three of them were once in a generation. So it was, it was like as opposed to winning the national lottery, it was more like winning the Euro Millions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
very much so. So as Brian said, we could really only give the Baltimore Oriole a certain amount of time if we wanted to find or if we wanted the opportunity to see the Nighthawk. So we left Achill Island and we drove to North County Antrim, and we arrived there just before dusk. And to be fair, we were treated to stunning views. I mean, of all the birds that we could have seen that weekend and that we did see that weekend, I have to say the Nighthawk was by far and away my favourite. It was doing incredibly acrobatic flights in around our head, folks. A beautiful bird.
John, I did a bit of maths. I think you spent 20 hours on the roads driving to see the three birds.
Very much so.
You could have driven to North America and seen all three of them very easily.
Possibly, Peter, you can't drive to North America.
You're right, Peter. 1,650 kilometers and the guts of 21 hours driving over the course of 2 or 3 days, and I would argue
that's a lot of carbon, John.
It is indeed. A lot of trees.
But it was split. It was split between 4 or 5 of us pretty much all the time. So
yeah, very, very true. Very, very true. I do feel guilty about that, Peter. It keeps me up at night. The bird was fantastic. It was great. We were delighted to see it. And as I said, that kind of brought around what we like to call the twitch, because it was the twitch. We challenge any Irish birder to tell us about any twitch that they could rival, that one in terms of epicness or awesomeness. It's the best twitch in Irish history. I'll go on record and say that's that.
And actually, then the next day, then I went back over to Achill and had absolutely crippling views of the Baltimore Oriole.
Oh, fantastic!
So, yeah,
I will say, yeah. And you actually had some fantastic shots of that as well, Brian.
I managed them through the scope. Yeah.
Are they your photos, Brian?
They're mine. Yeah. It just sat out for a couple of minutes, and I got it into the scope and took those with the phone through the scope. So
that's one. You have one up on me. I haven't seen Baltimore Oriole in Ireland.
No.
I hope you feel very gripped.
So no need to rub it in, Brian. No need to rub it in. Okay, folks, so that is the story of how we got our name. That is the story of how the Two in the Hand crew came together and how this podcast essentially was formed. What we're going to do in the second half of today's show is discuss current affairs. We hope to do this going forward. Now, you can't discuss birding or current birding in Ireland without mentioning boobies, and that will make Brian incredibly happy. Brian, would you like to tell us the story of the brown booby?
Yeah, so on the afternoon of the 13th of July, I got a phone call from a good friend, Cian Cardiff. I had just sat down for a bite to eat because it was about 5 to 4, and I was due into work at 5 o'clock. So when I saw Cian's name on the phone, I knew it was to do with a rare bird, because usually when you get a phone call from Cian, it's either because he has found a rare bird or that he has heard that there's a rare bird around, and it's usually when it's one that I need. So this is one of the few times I was really hoping that it wasn't one that I needed. So I answered the phone, and straight away he just said, "Brian, there's a brown booby sitting on Greystones Beach, Nile Hatches, after finding it." So my heart just sank because I really didn't know what to do. So whilst I was running up to the shop, I just dropped everything and just ran to the shop where I work in. And while I was running, I was ringing the lads to let them know the news. And I ran into the shop, which is about 2 or 3 minutes away from me, and just basically begged the other part-time worker who was behind the counter if there was any chance that they could stay on to do my evening shift. And thankfully they said that they would. So within minutes, a plan was kind of hatched. So
yeah, I got a phone call from Brian, and likewise, like when he gets a phone call from Cian Cardiff in the middle of the day, I know when I get a phone call from Brian, it's trouble. You know, I have three small kids and a wife and a busy life, and they don't like to be interrupted by twitches in the middle of the day. Now, I got a phone call from Brian, and Brian says, "Brown booby on Greystones Beach," and I just thought, oh no, not brown booby, not Greystones Beach. It was close enough to make me really want to go, but it was far enough that it was going to cause me trouble, because it was going to take like maybe an hour and a half to get there, an hour and a half to get back, and probably 3 or 4 hours in total. It was evening time. I was making the kids their dinner, and then we had to put the kids to bed. So you have to kind of think about all these things when you're a father and husband. And so I said to Brian, "Look, Brian, I'll have to ring you back. I'm going to have a chat with my lovely wife Olivia and see what she has to say, see if she's okay." So I went up and I said, "Look, there's a brown booby on Greystones Beach." And of course, she thought this was a joke. And then I had to explain to her what a brown booby was in a birding context. And so I organised the kids' dinner quickly. And the two little ones, the two smallest kids, said they'd love to come with me on a twitch. They'd never been on a twitch before. My daughters, Emily and Annabelle. So once they said they were going, that was great, because it meant that really Olivia was free at home on her own with the eldest child, which was no bother. So we decided, the kids decided they were going to go. So I rang Brian back and said, "Brian, the twitch is on. Get down here fast."
Yeah, so I also dread to have a phone call from Brian, but that's usually because he's breathing heavily. It's kind of weird. But no, in all seriousness, I got a phone call from Brian, and he said there's a brown booby on Greystones. Get away. I didn't believe him. I thought he was pulling me leg. And I says, "Look, I'll know." I actually had visitors in the house, and I didn't know if I could go. So I said, "I'll know within the next 45 minutes, or not." In the meantime, Brian and Peter left me, folks. That's exactly what they did. They left me.
We left him in a cloud of smoke.
Yeah. Well, I should hope not, because Peter drives an electric car. But you did abandon me. You did abandon me, Brian. Yes, I will admit that.
John, sometimes when rare birds turn up, it's every man for himself.
That could come back to haunt you, Peter. Anyway, so the lads actually tore up the road in front of me, as they say. And you guys arrived at what time?
I can't remember the exact time. It was around 6 o'clock we got there.
Yeah, it was close to 6 o'clock, yeah. And when we arrived, we pulled into the car park, and you could see there was a few frantic faces getting their bins and their telescopes out the backs of the cars. One thing I always notice about twitchers when they're arriving at a twitch, the most nervous time is when you arrive, but just before you see the bird, because you've made the commitment and the journey to travel there. and you're so near and yet so far from seeing the birds. So we headed out onto the beach, and Brian, I think you probably take it from here.
Yeah, so I ran down the beach. I could see Dave Fox, kind of, he was a couple of 100 meters down the beach with the scope set up. And I was just praying, because we had positive news the whole way down that it was on show, it was sitting on the rocks. So many times rare birds just fly off minutes before twitchers arrive. So I ran straight down to Dave's scope, and sure enough, looked in, and the brown booby was unbelievable, just still sitting there on the rocks. So
Brian, could you say it was glistening in the sun?
It was indeed.
Stop,
Peter,
stop.
yeah.
We can't talk with glistening movies. Stop. Okay, folks, to bring it back to the PG level, I can relate really well to what Peter was saying there about being near yet so far. I had an absolute howler with that particular twitch, because I inputted a pin that we'll just say some Burke, shall we say, some Burke dropped to the location, but actually dropped it to the center of the town and not where the bird was. So I arrived in rush hour traffic into the middle of Greystones, not a bird or a bird to be seen.
But John, the bird wasn't on the main street; it was on the coast.
Oh, was it, Brian? Funny enough, I never thought to check there. So luckily, that being near yet so far thing really struck home with me as you were saying that, Peter. But I rang Jer, and Jer directly says, "What are you doing in the middle of the town?" And I said, "I don't know, Jer. I have no idea why I'm in the middle of the town." But he gave me the new directions, and I pulled up. And I think the lads could see from my face that I was quite upset at this point. Road rage certainly was a feature of that journey. But
I think, John, you could describe it as a big angry head on you.
Yeah, probably so, Peter. Probably so. You might.
And the subtle shouting.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't deny that. Thanks, lads. No, I can't deny that. But I'll tell you, if I had been a minute or two later, it could have been a very, very tense evening, because I arrived on site, got the scope set up, and I got the bird for a couple of 45 seconds before it flew about a kilometre up the coast. So I cut myself and Tom McEntee, who came with me and who designed our logo. Thank you, Tom, you're a hero. We were very lucky to have seen it for that 45 seconds. Had it not, obviously it did reappear, but had it not appeared, somebody may have been shot that evening. I would have been annoyed. Is all I'd say about that. But as I say, all turned out well. We ended up finding the bird about a kilometre north up the coast, and we got crippling views. In fact, the shots that you see there, Brian and I took, we got within maybe 35 to 40 foot of the bird, Brian.
Probably so, yeah,
really well.
John was saying that it all turned out well. A typical comment from a selfish twitcher. It didn't quite all turn out well. Never mind the bird's welfare, John. It all turned out well for you because you saw it. But unfortunately, when we arrived on the beach, the bird was sitting up resting, and it was peculiar because the first photos of the bird were of the bird sitting on the beach amongst the picnickers, and the people were like, standing beside it taking selfies. And a little girl went up and stood beside the bird. Completely abnormal behavior for a wild bird. And when we saw it, when it arrived, it was sitting up on some rocks and it was asleep. And the feathers were all fluffed up, and that's a really bad sign for a bird. A bird sleep during the day with feathers fluffed up. It's a sign of illness. Now, most of the birders seem to be quite optimistic because they'd seen it fishing. I was a bit concerned about the bird's welfare. And unfortunately, the following day, the bird was taken into care. Now, I know a few people travelled from Galway to see it, and unfortunately, it was put in the back of the van and driven off with just before the lads arrived. Who were the two lads from Galway?
What happened to Brian?
Carl Forkin and Angus O'Donnell. They arrived. I think the bird was taken away at 5:30, and about 10 to 6, the lads arrived.
How did you feel about that, Brian?
Well, it's one terrible way to dip. I know I've come very, very close to some megas like Fia's Petrol and Veery's, but that's one terrible way to dip.
I think just to put it into context, brown booby is really rare bird in Europe. I know there's been a few records from Spain, but Ireland, they've only really appeared in the last couple of years, and this was the first bird that was twitchable. And they're a tropical species, so normally they're found around the equator. There's 4 different subspecies, 3 in the Pacific and 1 in the Atlantic. They breed around the Caribbean. And since the 1990s, the population have started to spread north. So they're breeding up in North America now, and they think it's due to climate change. So as the climate's been getting warmer, the food that the boobies like to eat has moved further north, and the birds are moving further north. So it's kind of part of the climate change situation that bird populations are moving, and the brown booby is a shining example of that.
Yeah, interestingly enough, now you mentioned global warming, Peter, Brian, you can give us the specifics of that, but within, I think, the next 24 hours, another brown booby turned up, I think 13 miles off the coast, and a subsequent one turned up in Iceland, which is quite rare. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and a second bird was found. It was actually would have been found before the Greystones bird, but news only came out after the whole Greystones situation had been kind of finished, I suppose.
The Greystones, I think we could describe it as the Greystones debacle.
I don't know why is there saying that. It turned out fantastically for me.
But just on the note for the bird, as John said, it turned out fantastic for him. But unfortunately, the brown booby was taken into care. Now, some of the bird watchers were a little bit annoyed because they didn't get a chance to see it in the wild. But it was taken into care for the right reasons. When they weighed it, I think it was Kildare Animal Rescue took it in. They weighed it. It was 30% lower than its normal body weight. So it was in poor condition. And I think after a few days, it was eating fine, but I think it had lost too much of its body condition, and eventually it passed away, which was a shame. Shame for the lads from Galway and of course the team that were looking after it, obviously very upset.
Yeah, to be fair, Peter,
Greystones.
You really do look cut up for the lads from Galway, I must say. Yeah. McCluskey, your grin going from ear to ear is really sending that.
It's the fact that, like, fair enough, like if you go to see a bird and it flies off, like, there's nothing you can do about that. But the fact that the bird was literally picked up and thrown in a van, you know.
So why did you call the Wildlife Foundation, by the way, Brian? Just out of curiosity. What led you to believe that the bird? No, to be fair to Peter, actually, I do think it should be mentioned. Everyone thought the bird was perfect, and he was the day before he was calling it. He was saying, "Yeah, I know this bird's not well. We're lucky we got it when we did," and that it did look okay. It was a sad end for the bird and for the Galway birders, and to be fair, no one likes to see that happen, lads. We're sorry for your tip. But one good point is that the brown booby has been donated to the Natural History Museum, and subsequently, maybe the Galway birders can go see it there. How's that? that might help them. No, in all seriousness,
John,
it's nice that it's
they can put it on their stuffed list.
Yes. As long as they get the ticket, I suppose they'll be happy enough. There's no morals south of
that being said, I genuinely do think the brown booby in 15, 20 years will probably be, you know, everybody will probably have seen it.
We shouldn't have bothered going. We shouldn't have bothered.
No, but it may well be. I mean, like, you look at the records. The records in Western Europe have certainly increased. Like, there's been about 4 in Britain in the last couple of years, and 4 in Ireland now. So, and another one in Iceland.
Brian, is there any other European countries apart from, like, the Western Seaboard, like Spain and Ireland and England and Iceland? Any other countries?
Yeah, as far as I know, all records come from France, Spain. I think there's 2 in France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Iceland, Britain. Almost all the records come from those countries.
So none have turned up in the North Sea yet for
not that I know of. No, not that I know of. I'm sure there probably is 1 or 2, but not that I know of anyway. So
it'd be really embarrassing if you missed that, Brian. You know, if you got that, we'd never forgive you. No, so that was the story. That was the story of the brown booby, and that is our roundup of weekly current affairs, folks. Hopefully we'll have a slightly happier ending for the next episode's current affairs section. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on, and we are going to show you our first ever vlog, okay? First thing I'll say is, unfortunately, Peter couldn't be with us on this occasion, and I will say, Peter, you were missed by
Thank you, John.
By McCluskey, because he loves to cuddle at night. But you were missed, Peter. Definitely you were. Jokes aside, I would also urge a little bit of caution in relation to the expectations that you as viewers may have. Please bear with us. This is our first attempt at anything like this. We had to learn how to use the camera. We had to learn how to use editing software. Jerry even had to learn how to drive down there. So bear with us, and please don't hold us to too high a standard. But for a little bit of context, this is a vlog chronicling our trip to Ireland's premier birding hotspot and the #1 place to find rare birds in Ireland, the Cumption. Please enjoy our first vlog. Brian and I arrived at Jer's house bright and early. We threw our stuff into the van and we wasted no time hitting the road. We were on our way to Cumption, Ireland's premier birding hotspot. It's certainly the place to be if you hope to find rare birds. That said, we were incredibly excited at what the day might hold. Unfortunately, this excitement didn't last. Let's just say the camper van's not the most spry of vehicles. Luckily, we had Brian on board to entertain us. We arrived at the Cumption with about an hour's light left in the day. Naturally, we grabbed our scopes first. We didn't have fantastic birding that evening, but we were delighted to see things like marsh harrier, water rail and reed warbler. As darkness fell, we decided it was important we set up camp. I have to say, Brian, you were truly invaluable at this stage. Psych! As the night went on, we cooked food, we drank some beer, we laughed, we joked, we told old war stories, and we reminisced fondly about old twitches. A great night was had by all. At around 12 AM, we decided it was time to get serious. We had an early night as we wanted to be ready for the morning. This strategy really paid off as we woke up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We crossed over from the East End car park and we trudged through mud, muck, sludge and anything else that was in our way, covering approximately 15 kilometres during the course of the day. We really left no stone unturned, but unfortunately, as the day progressed, we realised that the dreams we had of finding that rare mega probably weren't going to happen. After giving it hours and hours, we returned back to the van dejected, sulking for lack of a better word. As the trip drew to a close, we were thrown a lifeline. Luckily, another birder had found a wood sandpiper in the locality. This was by no means what you would call a mega, but it was rare enough and it would do. The chase was on. Be it the fact that we had to work so hard for the bird, or the fact that this was just a stunning example of the species, we were made up, and to be honest, this bird really saved the trip for us. As you can see by our faces, we were incredibly happy men. We returned home with smiles on our faces. Next time, we hope to find that rarity.
So we hope you enjoyed our first vlog.
Well, I didn't enjoy it, Brian. You spent 2 days in one of the best locations in the world for finding rare birds, and you only saw one as far as I can see, and you didn't even find that.
Good man, Peter.
Well,
Peter.
in in fairness, we had to look after Jer. So.
All right, Peter. Look, we can't get too annoyed with you for calling it as it is. We did say that it was our first vlog, and we're going to say that the filming detracted from our ability to find rare birds. That's our excuse this time. Thanks. That hasn't made the ending in any way awkward, Peter. Okay, we didn't find any rare birds this time, but there's always next time. And on that note, we hope to see you all then. Take care of yourselves and each other.
If you like our content, like, share, and subscribe. Click the button below.
Peter, no, wait. We don't have buttons below.